Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 54 event, which takes place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 total bouts. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, we went 2-1 with our premium bets to win 1.5 units, and we also went 1-0 with our free bets to win 2 units. We went into more detail in the last UFC Fight Night 53 podcast, which went out yesterday. Now, back to the present. UFC Fight Night 54 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2, and UFC Fight Pass this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass is a bantamweight contest between Pedro Munoz, who is 11-1, taking on Gerard Sanders, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Munoz minus 385, the comeback on Sanders, plus 265. Lines holding steady right now. And let me just quickly say that all lines are going to be courtesy of 5dimes.eu. And the lines were opened yesterday, so they've been up for about 24 hours or so, a little bit less than 24. So they're fairly fresh lines. So there hasn't been a ton of movement throughout, but there has been enough for us to make an impact. But this line in particular, Pedro Munoz and Sanders has not moved. It's staying pretty steady, almost 4-1 here. And the way these guys break down, it's pretty simple, honestly. I mean, Sanders is your typical wrestler grinder. He's a powerhouse. He's dropping to 135, which is good to see because he didn't really belong at 155. He made his UFC debut just kind of to make his debut to get into the UFC on the roster. So he took a fight on short notice and didn't fare so well. But this fight should be a lot better for him in some ways because he's going to have the size advantage, at least in this spot against Munoz. He's going to be a little bit, very slightly taller and a little bit longer. He's got a 72-inch reach compared to Munoz's 65-inch reach. So he's going to have some advantages here. He's a strong guy, like I just mentioned. But unfortunately for him though, skill set for skill set, he's outclassed here as well. Again, Sanders is basically your wrestler type that needs to get the fight to the floor, grinds people out. He has a little bit of power on the feet, but more than anything else, he's the type of guy that looks for submissions when he's on the ground, but he's more of a grinder and looks to win by decision. Munoz, on the other hand, he's more of a finisher. I mean, the guy is a well-rounded fighter. He's going to have a big advantage on the feet. He's more of a sniper. He mixes up his kicks and punches very well. He's very accurate with them, has a little bit of power to go along with it. Now, his submission game is what's really impressive to me as well. He's got decent, underrated wrestling, takedowns, scrambles. You can't hold the guy down. So Sanders is going to have difficulties controlling Munoz on the ground. And Munoz is going to be very dangerous with the sub game as well. The guy latches on the chokes, arms, anything he gets a hold of. He's that good. So he's really an up-and-coming prospect. I don't even know if you can call Munoz a prospect at this point. I mean, he's been around for a little while. I know he hasn't had a lot of UFC fights, but still, the hype on this guy's been around for a little while, and I think it's deservingly so. I think Munoz can be a serious contender at 135 as long as he keeps on progressing the proper way in his UFC career. The guy's legit, and I think he gets another notch on his resume here against Sanders. Sanders is unfortunately just outclassed here, so my pick is going to be Munoz, no doubt about it.
And I'm in complete agreement. Pedro Munoz clearly just outclasses Gerard Sanders. Sanders in his last fight, he was game against Sedeno, but it just wasn't enough. And obviously he was undersized, but I was surprised that he wasn't really able to get his wrestling going against a guy in Sedeno who didn't have very good offensive wrestling or defensive wrestling. And it felt like he just kind of gave up because, you know, if he had a really serious knee injury, then he wouldn't be back so quickly. I mean, he's fighting just as soon as Sedeno is. Sedeno's on this card. And, you know, that bout was stopped because he could barely walk and his knee was hurting him. So I'm really surprised that not only is he back, but now he's dropping down 2 weight classes. So, I really feel like the UFC is just feeding him to Munoz. Munoz is a really, really talented fighter. He showcased, obviously, the great ground game before he entered the UFC. And since coming to the UFC, I mean, they threw him into the ringer against, Sun Tzu in his debut, which was a little unfair. But in his last fight against Matt Hobart, who was a really talented fighter in his own right, Munoz dominated him, hurt him bad on the feet, and then finished him with ground and pound on the ground. He's very accurate. His striking has come a long way, and, you know, you cannot sleep on his ground game. We haven't seen a lot of it yet, but man, he's slick on the canvas. He finishes a lot of fights by submission. He has really good chokes. He's pretty good everywhere on the canvas. So I don't see a way at all that Gerard Sanders can win this fight unless he can take Munoz down, stay really strong with his hips, and then just hold him down and pray. Because other than that, Munoz is either going to lock up a submission, he's going to outpoint him on the feet, or he's going to finish him on the feet, because Sanders took some serious punishment from Sedeno as well. So my pick is clearly going to be Pedro Munoz here, and I think he wins relatively easily. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Albert Tumenov, who is 13-2, taking on Matt Dwyer, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I have been Tumenov minus 475, the comeback on Dwyer, plus 325. And there has been some significant movement on this fight. Tumenov is now down to minus 260. The comeback on Dwyer is plus 180. So support coming in on the underdog. If you look at Dwyer's resume, I mean, he does have a decent win or two along the way, especially recently. He's got a win over DeMarcus Johnson, a former UFC vet. He's got a win over Shody Carter, which isn't really that great these days, but still, he's I guess a named opponent. But more than anything else, I think a lot of people are giving him respect for his win over DeMarcus Johnson. But if you look closer at that fight, I don't know how many people out there that are actually betting this fight got the chance to check that fight out. In that fight, sure, Dwyer ended up winning the fight. He did what he had to do. He looked okay, but he was getting absolutely tagged, and he was almost out on his feet so many times. I mean, Johnson was landing at him at will. Now, Dwyer, I guess I should just get into kind of how they match up here. Dwyer's a very long, lanky type of fighter. He's 6'4". He's got a tremendous reach over most opponents. So that's his biggest advantage, I think. So he's a young prospect, has some power. But he's really kind of slow on the feet. I mean, he doesn't use that reach well. Defensively, he lets people close the gap way too much, and they can have success on him on the feet standing. And again, defensively, he gets tagged so much that his chin, give him credit that is held up overall, okay, I guess, because he's got some pretty quick recovery. But that doesn't bode well against a guy like Tumenov at all. So Dwyer's going to have to really look to take this fight to the floor, maybe get top position to work his ground and pound. He is impressive in that aspect of it, being so long. He does look for takedowns, and once he's on top, I mean, a guy's hard to get off you and shake because he knows how to smother you a little bit, has decent top control, and again, throws nasty elbows and has good ground and pound. So Dwyer has some skill, no doubt about it. And again, he's always going to be a little bit hard to match up with because of his pure size. But a fighter like Tumenov, I mean, Tumenov's a nasty striker. He started off a little bit rough in his UFC career, a surprising loss to Alcantara, but that fight was actually really close. I mean, super close, but he faded as the fight went on, ended up, losing the ground battle a little bit. And that's kind of what gave the edge to Alcantara in that fight. But he rebounded very nice against Anthony Lapsley in his last fight. He had a really good performance against probably an underrated Lapsley in most cases as well. So we got to see a little bit more of Tumenov, and I expect him to just keep on improving. Now that he's into the UFC, he's going to get a little bit more confidence. He's going to be a little bit more relaxed. You're going to see the real Tumenov come out and do what he does best. And again, it kind of features and showcases his striking. So you have a nasty striker that can end things with his legs or his hands going up against Dwyer, which his striking defense is horrible, as I just mentioned quite a few times. Not a good formula at all. I think Tumenov is able to keep the fight upright. I think he's going to do some serious damage on the feet. He probably ends up knocking Dwyer out. And maybe in the first round, it ends up getting finished here. I hope I'm not disrespecting Dwyer too much, but from what I've saw on tape, I mean, the guy, again, has a decent skill set, but against a fighter like Tumenov, it's not going to bode well for him. So I disagree with all the early action coming in on the underdog. I think that it's a favored or pass situation at this point, and I'm going to go with Tumenov.
And Nick may have been playing it politically correct, but I'm going to go out and disrespect Matt Dwyer. I don't think he's a very good fighter at all. The only thing he really has going for him is that he's very long and tall for the division at 6'4", compared to Tumenov's 5'11". But he doesn't use his range well. He throws with decent power, but he's really awkward. He's not very technical, and his defense is terrible. Albert Tumenov is a much, much more seasoned striker than Dwyer, and it's going to show in this fight. Unless Dwyer does something really crazy and has incredibly advanced his game in the past few months or something, then I don't see how Albert Tumenov loses it. I don't see how Albert Tumenov doesn't knock him out in the first round. Tumenov is so powerful, and he uses distance very well. He has a great ability of keeping his opponent, of cutting off the cage and maneuvering his opponent around, basically backing them up towards the fence, cutting off their escape routes, and then leading them into his power. And even though he's right-handed, his left hook is nasty. As you saw in his last fight against Anthony Lapsley, he was leading out with the left hook and the jab and the left jab, but he would just follow up with the left hook as a counter, and everything Lapsley did. Lapsley couldn't really move left or right circling on the outside because he'd either meet a left hook or a right hook depending on which direction he went. It was really, really impressive. And obviously the jitters were gone, and Tumenov settled in, and he looked fantastic, and he has nasty power. Dwyer, he's tough, but man, his striking defense is not good. If you watch this fight with DeMarcus Johnson, he got lit up in the first round, especially about the first 3 or 4 minutes. And this was when DeMarcus Johnson was on a 3 or 4 fight losing streak at the time. And Johnson looked like a world beater in the first few minutes. I really think that if Dwyer comes out that same way, he's not going to last a minute against Tumenov. Tumenov is just so powerful. And on the ground, while Dwyer has a decent ground game, you can't underestimate Tumenov. He actually does have a couple slick transitions, and while he's not known for his ground game, he knows what he's doing down there, and he should be able to counter whatever Dwyer throws at him on the canvas as well. And I really don't expect Dwyer to do much on the ground. So I'm going to pick Tumenov, and I think he wins easy. The first fight on the Fox Sports 2 preliminary card is a flyweight contest between Patrick Hollahan, who is 10-0-1, taking on Chris Kades, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Hollahan -405, the comeback on Kades, +285. Over 5 dimes right now, it's Hollahan -300. The comeback on Kades is +220. So again, respect coming in on the underdog. I guess I do see a reason behind it in this fight compared to the Dwyer fight that we were just talking about, which I didn't really see too much. Kades at least has a path to victory here. I guess first let me start off by saying Kades is taking this fight on very short notice. And typically if you watch footage on him, the guy ends up starting off strong, but as the fight progresses, he tends to fade. So right away, cardio is a question mark for me with Kades. For his background, he's an aggressive fighter. He's got that grinding style. He's more of a wrestling-based fighter. That's why I said at least he has a path to victory. So I can understand a little bit more support coming in early on in the underdog here, because he's going to have the wrestling and the grappling advantage in some ways here in this fight. So he's going to have a path to victory. He's never been submitted before in his career, which actually bodes well for him in this spot as well, because he's going to have to definitely have decent sub-defense to survive this fight against Hollahan. His takedown D itself is okay. He does get put on his back though. But once he does get put on his back, the impressive thing about Kades is more times than not he ends up scrambling, sweeping out of it, reverses things and gets on top. Then once on top, he does some decent damage on the ground. He has decent ground and pound to go along with it. He can beat you by submission. Although he's not a super huge threat, by sub on the ground, but that is a path to victory for him as well. On the feet, he's powerful again. I mean, he's got definitely some power in his hands. He's got decent clinch work. That's probably the most impressive thing about Kades on the feet for me, his knees and elbows from the clinch. So overall, he's a solid fighter. He's going to be fighting in his hometown. So there's a lot of good things about Kades. I just think, unfortunately for him, he's running into a pretty confident fighter in Hollahan that's only going to get better and only going to continue to improve. Hollahan's kind of the background for him is, he's trains at SBG Ireland. So with Conor McGregor and crew right now, that camp has a ton of momentum on their side. Hollahan is a tough 18 vet, and the question mark with Hollahan is he did get beat by majority decision to Josh Hill, which is, again, kind of a similar type of fighter, I think, as Kades in many ways. I think that's why people are coming in on this fight. They think Hollahan might get controlled and out decision here. I don't think he will, though. Hollahan's a very long, lanky fighter, rangy fighter for the division. He's decent on the feet. He's aggressive everywhere on the feet or on the ground. He goes for stuff. I mean, his win over Sampo was super impressive. It was almost shocking how bad he dominated Sampo. The good thing about Hollahan is he mixes everything in pretty well. He flows with the striking. He can close the gap a little bit to get inside and work the ground game as well from his striking. So everything is really good with Hollahan. I mean, he's a finisher. Especially on the ground, that's where he's more dangerous for sure. He snatches up with those long limbs. He's able to snatch submissions and make life miserable for people, whether he's on top or on the bottom. So I just think along the way, Kades might start off fairly decent in this fight, but as the fight progresses, Hollahan's going to find way too many spots to do some damage in Kades, whether it's with the ground and pound, whether it's even standing in the clinch. I think that Hollahan's going to have some advantages there, and then eventually, I think potentially we're going to see submission victories for Hollahan here as well. Again, Kades doesn't have any sub losses, but I think the way Hollahan goes about his submission game, he's so dangerous that eventually he finds his spot, and as Kades fades a little bit, he probably sinks in a choke or a submission at some point. So I am going to side with the favorite here. I think Hollahan is going to continue his momentum. I mean, he was super impressive, like I said, against Sampo. And Kades is actually a step down, in my opinion, from Josh Sampo. So I'm expecting Hollahan to be impressive and just keep his momentum going here.
Yeah, Kades isn't just a step down, he's a big step down. Obviously, he wasn't the guy they wanted him to face at first. They wanted Hollahan against Luis Gagnon, which would have been a great fight. But this time around, he's just, unfortunately, injuries happen in MMA, and this is the fight we're getting. Now, Kades isn't bad. He trains out of a decent gym. He trains with TJ Grant, top UFC lightweight contender. So, he's working with some relatively good people, but Hollahan looked so good in his UFC debut. He had improved drastically since his appearance on The Ultimate Fighter, and man, just worlds different. On the feet, he looked real quick, almost spastic movement all over the place, very unorthodox, and he showed some power. I was very impressed that he was able to stun and hurt Josh Sampo on the feet the way he did with that big uppercut. And he just throws so many strikes from odd angles. The one thing that does scare me is he keeps his hands really low when he's doing that. And he did walk into some big punches from Sampo. Sampo just doesn't have a lot of power. Kades does have some decent power, so Hollahan will have to be a little careful when he's stepping in there crazy. Now, if and when this fight does go to the ground, and I do expect it to, Kades has some pretty solid transitions on the canvas. His takedowns aren't great, but when he's on the ground, he's pretty slick, but he's not nearly as slick as Hollahan. Hollahan is so long and has some really, really solid movement on the canvas. He can lock in submissions from just about anywhere, whether it's off of his back or from top position. He had a very nice transition to a rear naked choke when Sampo tried to scramble with an armbar in his last fight. And I really don't see Kades being able to deal with that. Obviously, Kades is 7-1, and the one loss, though, was the first time he ever stepped up in competition at Bellator 119 in Canada, and he just got outworked. And I think that Hollahan should be able to do the same thing. Hollahan could probably win a decision if he just outworks him on the feet. Hollahan could hurt him on the feet with his power and length, and Hollahan could submit him on the ground. He's a very dynamic fighter, and I think he has a very high ceiling right now. So, Kades is just too much on too short a notice. I think he's taken this on about 5 or 6 days' notice, and I just don't see him being able to step in here and compete at a high level. So my pick is going to be Patrick Hollahan. Now, moving up to the lightweight division, we have Jason Sago, who is 10-1, taking on unbeaten Paul Felder, making his UFC debut at 8-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Sago, minus 185 to come back on Felder, plus 145. Immediate action came in on the underdog here and dropped Felder almost to a pick'em actually at some point. Then action started coming back in on Sago, and it's right back to where almost I opened it at minus 180, plus 140 at the time of the recording. Interesting fight. Felder is definitely a hyped prospect. He's fun to watch. He's got basically a karate taekwondo background, so he likes to stand and bang. He uses a very kick-heavy attack standing, and he's found a lot of success against lower-level competition. He's still developing with his hands in boxing. That's probably the weakest aspect of his stand-up game a little bit, but it's not too bad. And he's got, again, decent clinch work as well. So Felder's pretty solid overall. He trains with Renzo Gracie and crew. Well, actually, he trains out of Philly with Daniel Gracie, I believe, and crew instead, but still, I mean, he's got that Gracie background, so he's getting trained in all areas of the game. I mean, he's going to have a solid ground base to go along with it, but again, he's still a little bit raw, and he's developing as a fighter. But there is a ton of hype on this guy, and he's super dangerous on the feet especially. But the problem with Felder is he has been put on his back often, and on his back he can be controlled a little bit. Fighters were able to do some damage as well and get him in some tough spots. So against a guy like Sago is more of your grappling-based fighter, no doubt about it. He's got okay stand-up. It's always improving and getting a little bit better, but definitely the best attribute in Sago's game is his ground game. I mean, the guy's a submission guy. He likes to get the fight to the floor, and once he's on the floor, I mean, his top control is tremendous. He can do some damage. He looks to pass in position, and he looks to attack with submissions. His win over Shockley was very impressive. I was actually surprised how he was able to dominate a guy like Shockley. Shockley has a very solid wrestling base, and Sago just kind of went through him like nothing. I mean, very impressive. So Sago is going to look to take Felder to the ground here, and once he's on the ground, Felder is going to be severely outclassed. He's not ready yet, even though he's training with the Gracies, like I said. I think he's still going to be severely outclassed here. Sago's just on another level when it comes to the ground game. Sago, of course, is going to be kind of the hometown guy as well. Living and training in Canada. Again, he's been a prospect for a while on the Canadian scene, and he's finally getting the respect that he deserves, making his UFC debut in a successful one, and now getting this fight as well. So I really think it's Sago's fight to win or lose. I know Felder's going to be game. The line's competitive for a reason, because Felder has ways to win this fight. If he could keep it upright, stay off his back, he's the better striker, no doubt about it, and Felder can do some damage and possibly get Sago out of there. But overall, I think you got to give the edge to the grappler here. I think the grappler's going to be able to close the distance, get inside, put Felder on his back, and once Felder's on the ground, Sago's going to be able to get dominant position and end up working his jiu-jitsu or working a dominant position ground and pound, and we could see a stoppage that way as well. So even though Felder's legit, and I just think it's a hard matchup for him making his debut here against Sago, so I got to go with Sago.
And I completely agree. While Felder actually does have a little bit of buzz and hype surrounding him because he is a very exciting and dynamic striker with good knockout power, I just think that he's going to come into this fight with some serious disadvantages. Because even though Felder trains out of Renzo's gym, he's more of a striker. His ground game still has a long ways to go. His defensive wrestling isn't that great. And while he has some okay submission ability and transitions on the ground, he can get controlled and dominated, especially by a fighter like Sago. Sago actually does have some solid striking, but he didn't want any of that in his UFC debut. He just went to the ground. He had some very impressive trips and body lock takedowns against Josh Shockley, and he was super sticky on the canvas because Shockley was showcasing a very nice guard in that fight, and Sago just kept the pressure on and kept advancing position, kept dropping punishment, and kept making Shockley work. And even though Shockley kept retaining his guard, Sago kept advancing and kept punishing him. It was really, really impressive. I really came out of that fight thinking that Sago has some serious talent. Now, age-wise, I believe Sago's 28 and Felder's 30. So Felder's coming in here a little late, although he is very talented. His kicking game is incredibly good. He won the title, I believe, or defended the title by throwing a beautiful spinning back kick to the face of his opponent and ended up knocking him out cold. And he is very dangerous, whether he's at distance on the feet with his long-range kicks or up close in the clinch. He has some really brutal knees. So Sago's going to have to be very careful when this fight is on the feet, whether it's on distance or up close. And unfortunately, he's going to have to get up close when he wants to take this fight to the ground because he doesn't really shoot a good double leg. All of Sago's takedowns come from closing the distance with the body lock or with trips. So at some point, he's going to have to come through the fire to get this fight where he wants it because he clearly wants to get to the ground. And once he is on the ground, I really see Sago completely dominating this fight. He has very good submission ability and can gain dominant position and drop some good ground and pound as well. That's how he ended up finishing the fight against Shockley with some good punches from back mount, and Shockley just didn't defend him enough and the ref stepped in. So the way this fight plays out, unless Felder is able to keep this fight standing and his takedown defense has improved drastically, I see Sago basically having his way with him. And so my pick is going to be Jason Sago. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Ultimate Fighter finalist Olivier Aubin Mercier, who is 5-1, taking on Jake Lindsay, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Aubin Mercier minus 290 to come back on Lindsay, plus 210. Right now, over at 5 dimes, it is minus 400 for Aubin Mercier, and the comeback on Lindsay's plus 280. But, quick note, I mean, the line did drop. It was another case where the line dropped early. There was support coming in on Lindsay early on, and the line actually dipped down below, I believe, around 200, or if not lower. And now it's climbed all the way back up, of course, to minus 400, which I think is correct. And I was kind of sad to see the line kind of climb up there. I thought there was going to be a lot more value, with all the dog action early on. So I was kind of bummed out a little bit. I know that I've been a fan of, Lindsay, obviously I supported him. I thought he had a better shot than it kind of played out, how it played out against, Tuck in Lindsay's debut. He did take that fight on short notice. But Lindsay's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter. Unfortunately for him, I just think he's going to get outclassed by Aubin Mercier here. I think that, Aubin Mercier is one of these guys. I mean, I'm glad that he's dropping down to the better fit weight class for him at lightweight. Of course, for the Ultimate Fighter, he was a finalist, but at a division heavier. So he's going to be even more dominant, I think, as lightweight. And that's not going to be a good thing for Lindsay. I think Aubin Mercier is able to control and dictate the tempo of the fight in most cases. Lindsay's pretty aggressive, with his attack. I mean, he's got some decent wrestling, decent stand-up, decent clinch work, decent body work. So there's a lot of good things about Lindsay, but he still lacks where Aubin Mercier, I think, excels, and that's getting the fight to the ground. He's going to have a little bit more pure strength, Mercier is. His stand-up continues to improve. For a grappling-based fighter, Aubin Mercier, in his Ultimate Fighter finale, in that championship bout there, he actually looked decent on the feet against a very game Lepris in that fight, against a very game striker, I should say. So his overall game continues to improve. He's only 25 years old, and we're going to keep on seeing big strides, I think, from Mercier. And the problem with him is, I mean, his takedowns, I know he didn't have a lot of success getting the fight to the floor against Lepris in that debut. Again, it was a weight class heavier. I don't think he's going to struggle as much against Lindsay. I think he's going to be able to control Lindsay on the ground if the fight gets there. Even on the feet, I think he's going to be able to push forward and kind of control up against the cage, up against the clinch, and do some damage on the feet as well. Lindsay's going to be very game. He's so well-rounded again. He even has some decent takedowns, decent submissions to go along with it, but not on the same level as Aubin Mercier. So this is stylistically, it's kind of a bad matchup for him. Lindsay's not getting an easy road in the UFC at all. I mean, fighting Tuck, I thought he had a better shot than he does here, obviously, against Aubin Mercier. I think there's a huge upside Aubin Mercier. I mean, a lot of people were kind of saying he's the next GSP. Coming out of Canada, whatever. I don't know if that's the case, but at the same time, I mean, I could definitely see the potential that everybody else sees in him. So a lot of good signs ahead for Mercier. I think if they bring him up the right way, the guy's going to move up that lightweight ladder pretty fast, and he's going to be dominant doing it in some cases. So I think this is going to be one of those times. I'm expecting good things from Aubin Mercier, and I just think stylistically, again, it's kind of a bad matchup for Lindsay. So I do agree with the late action coming in on Aubin Mercier. I think the kid's a stud, and he's going to continue to improve, so I got to pick him.
And I'm in relative agreement, although I think Mercier is probably going to look even better than you expect. Now, Lindsay, he is dangerous for about 5 minutes. He has some decent power, and, he can hurt you with, in the clinch and with big knees, and even from distance, he has some pretty good straight punches. The problem here is I don't think his defensive grappling is going to be up to snuff here against a guy in Mercier who wants to take you down and beat you up. And I really feel like what's going to happen here is Lindsay's going to come out strong, Mercier's going to duck under a big punch, and he's going to take him down and he's going to beat him up. Lindsay, in his UFC debut, really was unimpressive. He ran out of steam and then ended up tapping out to, I believe, body punches on the ground. I mean, it was just not a good performance whatsoever. I was very disappointed in how Lindsay looked. And I really feel like Mercier is a step up from Tuck. So honestly, this could be even worse. And Mercier, he was a really hyped prospect out of the most recent Ultimate Fighter Nations event that they had, and he ended up making it to the finals and was hyped up as a guy like that could potentially be one of the next GSPs. Obviously that didn't come to pass. He lost in the finale, but this is a great comeback fight for him. UFC clearly has high hopes for him, and they are giving him a fight that they think he can win. And I really don't feel like Lindsay is going to offer a whole lot here. Basically, he's going to have a puncher's chance when this fight's on the feet, and the second it goes to the ground, Mercier is going to be in control. And then the second this fight gets past the first 5, 6, 7 minutes, I don't think Lindsay's going to even be able to do that. He's just going to be completely out of steam unless that was a big UFC jitters adrenaline dump type of situation. So my pick is going to be Aubin Mercier, and I think he wins relatively convincingly. Now, again, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Darren Krookshank, who is 15-5, taking on Anthony Kuani, who is 16-8 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Up in Krookshank minus 125 the comeback, and Kuani minus 115. Man, Krookshank getting all the love and support. He's minus 180 right now. He even peaked up a little bit higher at one point, I think. And Kuani is down to plus 140, or he's at 140 right now. So a tremendous amount of support coming in on Krookshank. I disagree on that spot, honestly. I think that, Krookshank, I guess I've been a little bit of a critic with Krookshank. I haven't really seen what everybody else does in, his abilities. I know he's getting better all the time. And he's definitely a well-rounded fighter, and the aspects of his stand-up game is definitely legit, with his kicks being very powerful, very unorthodox. He's got that, again, kind of a karate style. He can knock you out with a head kick. He can knock you out with his hands. He's a very versed striker. So, and he's got power and speed to go along with it. So he's definitely dangerous in game on the feet. He's got some wrestling skill, underrated wrestling skill probably to go along with it. Doesn't have much in submissions, honestly, not too much at all. So you don't really have much of a threat for Krookshank in the submission game. But again, with his wrestling, usually with his striking game, the guy's definitely a threat. So he can outpoint you, he can decision you, obviously, and then he can actually end it as well. So there's a lot of ways Krookshank can win a fight, but unfortunately for him with Kuani, I think that he's going to struggle here in this fight, because he's not going to be able to, I think, beat Kuani on the feet. I think Kuani, obviously, he's going to be a little bit longer. He is getting up there a little bit in age, Kuani. Now, that's one thing that concerns me about him. He's 34 years old. So any time now we could see a kind of a severe decline spot. I know a lot of people, I guess, are off Kuani's bandwagon a little bit because he got, severely, well, I wouldn't say severely dominated, but he got dominated by Vince Mitchell in his last fight. But we actually bet on Vince, so we were kind of expecting that. Vince is a grinder. He was going to come in with a game plan to look for takedowns and kind of control the pace against Kuani. Now, Krookshank, even though he's capable of out-wrestling most people, I think he's going to struggle here getting Kuani on the floor. I think, and if he does struggle getting Kuani on the floor, stylistically, I think he's a bad matchup on the feet. Kuani's going to be the longer striker. He's going to be the more effective striker. He throws good timing with his knees. I mean, obviously he knows how to use his hands well. He leads with the jab, and it basically flows off of that with his attack. I mean, he's got devastating leg kicks as well, kicking attack period. He can end things. Again, I was just talking about Krookshank. Kuani is the kind of guy that can end things with his legs or his hands as well. So I don't think that really is a good situation for Krookshank. He tends to run into things. I mean, look at, on the Ultimate Fighter, I know that's kind of how he got beat. He got floored by a nasty knee. And I could see basically the same thing happening here against Kuani. Even if he doesn't get knocked out, Krookshank doesn't, I think he's going to get outpointed here. Kuani is a very underrated striker at this point. I'm saying that because people are just jumping off his wagon with, again, his recent performance, I think, against Vincent. I don't think that's very fair to say. I think Kuani is able to keep this fight standing, and he's able to do more damage along the way and at least outpoint Krookshank. If not, I think he can finish him along the way too. So I'm going to actually go out and pick the underdog and go against the grain. It seems like I'm kind of the only one that I know. I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that. There's another gentleman from our website, Brad, actually thinks that Kuani's got a legit shot as well. But other than that, I don't think there's too many people that actually are giving Kuani too much of a chance. I kind of like it that way, but because I think he's going to end up coming out with a victory here and surprising everybody. So I think there's still some gas left in his tank, and I think stylistically this is a good fight for him. He's not going to have to battle that fierce grappler that is usually Kuani's kryptonite. I think he's going to be able to do what he does best and excel in the stand-up game here against Krookshank. So my pick is going to be the underdog, Kuani.
And while I do think you have a lot of good points, and this probably is one of the closest fights for me to call on the entire card, I'm going to go slightly the other way, although not confidently. Krookshank has just looked a little bit better recently. He's the quicker fighter, and he is the younger fighter, so he has that going for him. Now, obviously, Kuani from distance is going to be very dangerous. He has a really solid technical kickboxing game, and he has serious power. Krookshank, he actually has some underrated power as well. I mean, if you remember, he dropped Jorge Masvidal in his last fight before ultimately losing a decision, and before that, obviously, he blasted Eric Koch with a head kick, and he's got a plethora of very impressive finishes in the UFC already due to his dynamic kicking game. But what's scary here is Krookshank has a very poor chin, does not take a punch well, and Kuani is very accurate and dangerous. He's much more accurate than Krookshank, actually. And actually, surprisingly enough, he actually lands more strikes, although that might be skewed because of the Andre Winner fight. Now, in terms of where these guys are at this place in their career, Krookshank being the younger fighter, I am a little worried about Kuani being 34 years old. He has started to slow down. There was a lot of hype for him back in the WEC days when he was scoring, I believe, 3 or 4 straight brutal knockouts and winning Knockout of the Nights in the WEC. It hasn't quite translated to the UFC, but again, he's been facing some pretty top caliber opposition. You know, he's been thrown in there against the likes of Rafael dos Anjos and other people. So it's a little difficult to get a bead on just where he is right now. Obviously his last fight against Vince Pichel was a very poor showing. He wasn't able to get anything going on the feet, was constantly having to defend takedowns, and was repeatedly put on his back. I don't think that's going to be the case this time around. While Krookshank has a decent wrestling game, he hasn't really showcased it at all in the UFC, even in fights I thought he would, like the McDessie fight. And honestly, if he doesn't employ that game, he could be in some trouble here. Kuani is going to be the taller, longer fighter, so Krookshank really is only going to be able to trade his kicks with it, and his punching game is not going to be a big factor here unless he's able to get inside and get out quickly before Kuani can react. Krookshank is going to have the speed advantage, and he's going to be working from the outside most likely while Kuani takes the center of the cage. And he's going to have to play a game of hit and run a little bit where he gets in, lands his shots, and gets out. And it's not going to be an easy strategy, but I think he can pull it off. Although again, I am not confident. The main reason I'm going with Krookshank is just that Kuani is getting a little bit up there in years, and Krookshank is a little quicker and has a little bit more diversity to his overall game with the added ground skills. So I'm going to pick Krookshank, but I am not confident whatsoever with it. Now, what do the numbers tell us, Reed?
Well, we definitely have 2 dangerous strikers here. These guys have combined for 10 knockdowns in their UFC careers, which is quite a lot. Both of them, on a punch-for-punch basis, have a knockdown rate that is well above the average for lightweight, each actually more than twice the average. So these guys pack a lot of power, and they're very good at putting people on the mat and finding people's chins. So how do the rest of the metrics stack up? First of all, Kuani is going to have the reach advantage, which I think Krookshank is used to at this point. He's a lightweight, only a 72-inch wingspan. He's kind of under average, so he's probably used to being outranged. And his accuracy, although it's only 28%, I think that's a little bit misleading because he uses his feet for a lot of those. So that accuracy is probably a lot better with his hands, and he's very dangerous with his shins, finding people's heads, as Eric Koch saw. But in terms of pace, Kuani with his long range, he tends to control the cage. He tends to outwork people. He averages a higher pace, and he has the better defense, which is an important metric for a guy who's about to turn 35 next year. Kuani is 5 years older, so Krookshank does have some tail of the tape advantage to offset the reach differential. But other than that, I mean, this is two guys who are very dangerous. So it could go either way in terms of the standing exchanges. Who lands that vicious shot first? Krookshank is certainly going to be headhunting. He loves to kick people in the head, and there's no denying that. So on the ground, I think it's less interesting of a matchup. Both guys, I think, don't really like to use their ground game. In fact, Kuani, for the vast majority of his minutes on the ground, he's been on his back. He's been out-controlled by people. And Krookshank, it's actually been half and half, although I think that last fight with Masvidal showed that he can be out-wrestled, and that's the way to neutralize a striker like him. So I see this as pretty even. There are a couple advantages supporting each guy. I think there are a few more on Kuani's side, a few more statistical advantages, but I would not count Krookshank out of this. I think this is one of those lines that I think will have a lot of people confused and probably going both ways. So I see it as an even matchup. And what I hope most is simply that they do stand and trade and we figure out who the better striker really is, because I think this could actually be a fun fight.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, the first fight on the main card features a bantamweight contest between Mitch Gagnon, who is 11-2, taking on UFC newcomer Roman Salazar, who is 9-2 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Gagnon minus 505, comeback on Salazar plus 335. That was my opening line. Right now, Gagnon is minus 600, Salazar plus 400. So looks like it was a fairly decent spot to open with the support coming in on Gagnon, and it is that kind of fight. I mean, Salazar is definitely a very solid MMA fighter. He's replacing, I should say, this is the third replacement fight, I believe, for Gagnon. I mean, Salazar's replacing Sterling. So this fight, and then obviously, he's actually replacing Fonts, I should say. So Font replaced Sterling. So this is the third, person that, Gagnon's getting to fight here. So Salazar's coming in on super short notice. But he did fight a couple weeks back, and won by submission. So Salazar, I think, is going to be in fairly decent shape, but still, I mean, I don't like the fact that he's coming in at such short notice. Again, it's another one of those situations that UFC comes calling. You don't really want to turn him down because win or lose, you know you're going to gain a roster spot. As long as you perform halfway decent at least. And Salazar is definitely one of these guys that has a ton of heart, and has decent, ability and potential, along the way. I think that it's going to be a rough debut for him though, because Gagnon is just a beast. But getting back to Salazar real quick, I mean, he is a very well-rounded young fighter. He's got an okay skill set. He's light on his feet, mixes everything in well with his kicks and his punches. He's got good knees from the clinch. His timing is really good with his knees. And he's shown some heart and ability to recover when he's hurt. But the problem is he does get hurt quite often. Because, this last fight or a couple fights ago, if looking back, he was tagged. He barely, hung on and survived against a mid-level kind of, opponent. He was in all sorts of trouble, but he did manage to survive that fight, come back, and end up submitting his opponent. So that showed me a lot of heart. But the problem is against a fighter like Gagnon, which is a tremendous powerhouse, and especially in the grappling realm, that's what Gagnon excels in the most. But he does have some power on the feet as well. So I just think it's a horrific matchup for him. Gagnon, if he wants to get him the fight to the floor, he's going to be able to get it to the floor. He's going to be able to control the wrestling. He's going to be able to control the overall jiu-jitsu game. He's far more dangerous when it comes to submissions. He's got nasty ground and pound. The power Salazar is not going to be able to take of Mitch. I mean, this is really, it's hard to believe that Gagnon will lose this fight in any aspect of the game. I mean, that's how much more dominant he should be in this spot. And for him, a lot of times, we've been saying recently, at least with UFC replacement fighters, sometimes the replacement's actually a more difficult matchup than the original opponent. But dropping from Sterling to Font and then to Salazar, this is definitely a huge step down for Gagnon. So it's a step that I think he's going to pass with flying colors. I mean, this isn't really going to be too much of a challenge. It shouldn't be, at least. For Gagnon, and I think, again, he's going to be the Canadian here. He's going to have the crowd behind him, and he's going to be super motivated. And mentally, it can't be a bad thing when you go from opponents that had a chance to beat you to a guy like Salazar, which honestly, I mean, he's going to have to kind of get that lucky punch to end things here, in my opinion. So it's kind of a no-brainer. You got to go with Gagnon in this spot.
And I completely agree. Mainly just because Mitch Gagnon was getting thrown in there against some really high-level guys in Aljamain Sterling and Rob Font, and Salazar just isn't quite there yet. Obviously, he is a decent fighter, but because otherwise he wouldn't be getting this call, but he's just not on that same level. Mitch Gagnon, in my opinion, is fringe top 15 UFC bantamweight. He's been knocking on the door to becoming a contender ever since his failed UFC debut against Brian Caroway. And Gagnon has done a lot of really good work to shore up some of his deficiencies. The main problem people had with him was he wasn't a great striker and he didn't have very good conditioning. If he didn't get the fight done in the first round, he was in a lot of trouble. He's done a lot of really good work to rectify that, and in his last fight it really showed where he was able to go the full 15 minutes and he looked great the whole time, didn't really slow down at all. So unless that was just a fluke of great conditioning, then I think that he's going to be in relatively good shape here against Salazar. He should be able to win the striking exchanges, as he has definitely improved his stand-up skills. He has some very solid body kicks, some body punches. He mixes it up pretty well. He's still a little stiff, but he has big power. And on the ground, he has excellent wrestling, very good submission ability, and he can finish a fight just about any moment. So you really got to watch out. Mitch Gagnon by submission in round 1 used to be one of my favorite bets. So this time around, it could definitely happen. Salazar, he's a good fighter. He trains alongside some UFC talent in Henry Cejudo and Frankie Sains, but he doesn't actually have the big wrestling base that those guys have. He's more of a stand-up guy. His striking is decent, but he doesn't pack a lot of power, and I think Gagnon should be able to walk through most of what Salazar throws at him and be able to land with power in his own and get him to the canvas when he wants to go there. Salazar, he had a very competitive fight for a title in one of his more recent bouts, and honestly, it could have gone either way, and that guy was not even close to the level of Mitch Gagnon. So I really feel like while Salazar is a nice developing talent, his stand-up skills are not going to be enough. He doesn't pack the power to threaten a finish against Gagnon, which is usually how an underdog can win a fight, and he's taking this fight on very short notice. So I really feel like Gagnon, it's his fight to lose, and he's probably going to come out there and get a quick finish. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Nordine Taleb, who is 9-2, taking on Li Jinglong, who is also 9-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Taleb minus 350, the comeback on Lee plus 250. That was my opening line. Right now over 5 knives, Taleb is minus 400. The comeback on Lee is plus 280. So a little bit more support coming in on Taleb. And I can understand it, honestly. I mean, it's Taleb's fight to win or lose. Lee's a pretty good fighter overall, probably a little bit underrated. He's got a well-rounded skill set. On the feet, he works behind a decent jab. He's got a good, powerful right hand, throws some solid leg kicks, even goes to the body, which is pretty impressive. His wrestling base is decent too. I mean, he looks for takedowns often, and once he gets to the floor, he's got decent control, decent ground and pound to go along with it as well. And he's still fairly young. For 26 years old, he's going to continue to improve his overall game, but he kind of has a long way to go. He still has some development to do, and to become I think a better finisher in the UFC at least. He's got some work to do. But Taleb, on the other hand, he's a pretty popular fighter. I mean, obviously the UFC see something in this guy. Not just the popularity. I mean, he's a Canadian-based fighter, of course, training out of TriStar. So he's got a solid fan base to go along with it. But he's got a decent skill set as well. I mean, Taleb's one of these guys that, regardless where the fight takes place, he's usually pretty game. More of a striking-based fighter. He's got some power on the feet. But at the same time, I mean, he can take the fight to the ground and control you underground as well. Doesn't have any official submission wins on his resume, but he's definitely capable of being okay, and at least his submission defense is decent, and he's not an idiot when it comes to groundwork as well. As that's what I guess I'm trying to spit out here. But he's more of a grinder, more of a guy that can outpoint you and do some damage on the feet along the way. He's got a ton of heart, but the problem with Taleb is his defense is a little bit flawed on the feet. I mean, he gets tagged a little bit way too much. He can be controlled by good grapplers and wrestlers at times as well. So he definitely has some flaws. I think Taleb is probably a little bit overrated at this point, based on the popularity and I guess the marketability that he has in the UFC. But this is a matchup that he should be able to win, because I think regardless of where the fight takes place, if Lee's shooting it for takedowns, he's not going to have a tremendous amount of success getting it to the ground. On the feet, Taleb has an advantage. I think he can at least outpoint Lee, do damage along the way, maybe even get a finish, which I doubt. Lee's pretty tough. I think he's going to be game enough to survive here. But overall, I think it's Taleb's fight to win or lose. I mean, he should kind of win this fight on the scorecards relatively easy, at least 29-28, maybe even 30-27 type of decision across the board. I just don't see Lee kind of stepping up enough to win this fight. So I can understand the early action going in on a favorite a little bit. I'm sure Taleb's going to be involved in a lot of parlays out there, and it's a fight realistically he should win.
And I agree. Jinglong is actually a pretty decent fighter. He has the nickname the Leech for a reason. He had a relatively impressive UFC debut. It was a very competitive fight, but he was able to eke out a decision against David Michaud. Taleb, on the other hand, trains at a TriStar. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He is basically a jack of all trades, master of none type guy, where he's good on the feet, he's pretty good on the ground, he's got good wrestling, good defensive wrestling, but he's not so good at any of those skills that he is dominant and a big finisher. So that plays into Lee's game a little bit, where Lee is a pretty good top control guy, and UFC is definitely investing a bit into this guy because they think he has some potential, but again, he's not quite there yet, and UFC has thrown him in there against Taleb, who is much more experienced. Even though they have the same 9-2 record, Taleb has fought significantly better opposition and had 2 stints on The Ultimate Fighter, believe it or not, and honestly trains with a much better gym with TriStar. Now, Jinglong, they've done some work with him. They brought him out to Vegas. He worked with Ricky Lundell. They're really doing a lot to advance his overall game. But Taleb should have the advantage on the feet. He's a much more technical fighter. Lee is more of a brawler and with a little bit of pop in his punches. But where Lee shines is when he's on the ground, when he's in top position. He drops some pretty good ground and pound. His submission game is still a work in progress. His transition game is still a work in progress. But he has the fundamentals down. He's actually one of the better prospects to come out of China, in my opinion. But I do think this is a little too much too soon for him. While Taleb isn't a high-tier UFC welterweight, he does have a really solid overall skill set, and it's going to be very difficult for Jinglong to get anything going against him. I think Taleb outworks him on the feet, outlands him on the feet, has a little bit more power, and then when it goes to the ground, Taleb should probably win the scrambles. But I'm not going to completely give up on Jinglong. I think the guy actually has some talent, and he'll stick around in the UFC for a little bit, fighting some lower tier UFC welterweights as he continues to develop his skill set. So my pick is going to be Taleb, and I think he probably wins decision, but you never know. Now, moving on and moving up to the middleweight division, we have Ultimate Fighter winner Elias Theodoro, who is 9-0, taking on Bruno Santos, who is 14-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Theodoro comes in minus 290, Santos plus 210. That was my opening line, and right now Theodoro is minus 400. So I'm a little disappointed here because I honestly figured maybe Santos would get a little bit of respect. Unfortunately, I was wrong, and it looks like the betting action early on, at least, is probably heading in the right direction because this is Theodoro's fight to win or lose. I mean, Santos, he's coming off an impressive performance, or a close fight, but a decision that he should have probably got over Kamosi, which was, again, a big win for him. I think overall, he was an underdog coming into that spot, and he showed what he can do. And what he can do, basically, or what he looks to do, is obviously outgrind his opponents, get some takedowns, looks to control the fight up against the cage, get you on the ground and pound you a little bit. He does have a decent grappling and submission game. He just doesn't really use it. He hasn't finished many fights by sub. And he's a little powerhouse. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Santos is kind of one of these short, stocky, strong fighters that, on the feet, he doesn't do much, but he does have some power. His hands are okay, not too great. I think his leg kicks are probably his best attribute on the feet, honestly. But again, closing the distance, working up against the cage, dirty boxing, that type of thing, getting the fight to the floor. That's what Santos tries to do. But unfortunately for him, Theodoro, obviously, the Ultimate Fighter winner, he's just a tremendous talent. I mean, he's 26 years old. He's going to continue to improve his overall game. He's going to gain more confidence as his career progresses, which is scary, and he's only going to get better too. And Theodoro is actually, everywhere this fight takes place, he's going to be game. I mean, he's got decent takedown defense, so Santos is going to struggle getting this fight to the floor. Theodoro has nasty knees and work from the clinch in general. The guy's a pretty accurate striker. He's got that killer instinct, which you like to see. And he's well-rounded. I mean, he can end things by submission. He's got that outside shot of landing a submission. That's not necessarily the thing he goes after the most, but at the same time, he's got that capability. And again, on the feet, I think I've been nothing but impressed with his overall skill set. I mean, the guy has kicks, he's got punches, again, knees from the clinch, everything to go along with it. And his fight IQ is what impresses me the most as well. His Ultimate Fighter victory was very impressive. He did what he had to do. He stifled off some takedowns and then just was dominant in that performance, no doubt about it. So I think Theodoro, he's going to probably, especially early on, he's going to maybe get pushed up against the cage at times, but he's going to end up rolling off the cage and doing some pretty good damage to Santos. Santos is a hard guy to stop. He's never been finished in his career, but I think this is an interesting spot. And if somebody could finish him, it's a guy like Theodoro, because he's going to be able to, as Santos closes the distance, he's going to be able to do damage in that clinch. And Theodoro is, again, a very young kid, but he's got some strength. I was talking about how powerful Santos is. Theodoro is not exactly a weakling in his own right, so Theodoro is going to do some damage, I think, along the way. Enough, at least, to win a clear decision. But if not, I think he has an outside chance at stopping and finishing Santos along the way, because Santos is going to eat so much damage. I think in the clinch, if Theodoro gets on top, which there's a possibility, he's pretty good at scrambling, transitioning, getting in the spot he needs to be to do some damage underground as well. And again, with that killer instinct, I think he can have success in all areas of this fight. So Theodoro, very impressive. I think this kid has a huge upside, and he's going to go a long way in the UFC, especially if they keep on matching him the proper way. And I think this is a good step. So Theodoro is going to have a dominant performance here, and I think he's going to get the W.
And I'm in agreement. Honestly, Santos doesn't have a lot of ways to win this fight. He is a very large not very large, he's a very strong and physical middleweight, but he's very small for the division, actually, and Theodoro is going to have a pretty significant height and reach advantage against him. And if you look at the way Santos fights, he's a grinder is the only way to describe him. He gets inside, he does not pack much punch, and he needs to get fights to the ground where he can take his opponent to the ground and control them. He doesn't have a lot of submission ability. He doesn't have a lot of ground and pound. It's just all about control. And Theodoro is so much more well-rounded and dangerous that, this fight, I'm really surprised that the odds haven't completely spiraled out of control, because Theodoro is, he has the grappling base. He actually was getting criticized a little bit on the Ultimate Fighter season that he ended up winning, because he was being too safe on the feet and getting takedowns and grinding people out, kind of like Santos. But when he had to go out and finish a fight and dominate, when the opportunity to get the six-figure contract was on the line, he unloaded on Sheldon Westcott and absolutely crushed him. So I really expect to see Theodoro come in here and work over Santos on the feet, kind of like Jotko was able to do in the UFC debut for Santos. And except Theodoro is going to pack a little bit more punch. He's going to be a little more dynamic with his punches and kicks. And if and when this fight goes to the ground, Theodoro is going to be able to scramble well. He might even be able to out-wrestle Santos, who is a little plodding and slow. And I could definitely see Theodoro dropping some huge ground and pound if Santos finds himself in a bad position or finds himself on his back. So this is honestly, in my opinion, Theodoro's fight to lose. And I don't see a lot of paths to victory because I cannot see Santos getting takedowns for 2 out of 3 rounds and keeping Theodoro on the ground. It just doesn't come into my mind as a possibility. It's not going to happen. So I'm definitely on the Elias Theodoro hype train. Now moving down to the lightweight division, we have Chad Lepris, who is 9-0, taking on Yosdenis Sedeno, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Lepris minus 300, Sedeno plus 220. That was my opening line. And right now it's minus 280 for Lepris. Comeback on Sedeno is plus 200. So a little bit more support coming in on the underdog early on. And it actually dropped a little bit even lower than I just stated, and it's climbing back up a little bit on Lepris. This is going to be an interesting fight, at least early on. Lepris to me was very impressive. I mean, he's a talented fighter. I mean, the Ultimate Fighter winner, obviously. His matchup against Mercier was a brilliant performance, really, if you think about it. He knew what he had to do there. He was game. His fight IQ is decent. He put the work in. You could tell that he's very professional about all aspects of the game. That's what impresses me about Lepris. And he's got that fight IQ to go along with it. So I think there's a huge upside to Lepris. Now, Sedeno, on the other hand, there was some hype coming into the UFC with Sedeno. I mean, he's definitely a very talented, gifted striker training out of American Top Team now. Is only going to help his career along the way. But the problem with Sedeno is his cardio lets him down, I think, at times. He's a very devastating striker in his attack, especially early on. I mean, the guy has nasty kicks, good speed, good power to go along with it, decent takedown defense early on, at least, or shows signs of it, throughout fights, but he can be put on his back, he can be controlled, and especially when he fades along the way, his striking becomes less of an impact, and he can get definitely beat even on the feet, and that's his best attribute. So against Lepris, I think Lepris is going to have to maybe weather an early storm. It'll probably be competitive for the first few minutes of the fight, but as soon as that gas tank starts to empty with Sedeno, I think Lepris is going to be able to take over. Again, with that fight IQ, he's going to know what he needs to do to get the W here. I think I know Lepris is more of a striking-based fighter, but if he needs to go for a takedown or two to kind of help seal some rounds here, I think he's going to be able to do it against Sedeno, especially in round 2 and round 3 along the way. But more than that, even if he is not able to get the takedown, he's going to be able to outpoint Sedeno. He's going to be the busier fighter. He's going to be able to land more accurate shots along the way. And Lepris actually has some power to go along with it. I mean, his punching power is a little bit underrated. And the way he mixes everything up is very impressive. So it's fun to watch Lepris strike. It's fun to watch Sedeno strike. It should be a fun fight, especially early on. It's a good matchup, but I really don't think Sedeno, unless he lands something early on and just catches Lepris, I don't think he's going to win this fight. I think it's a fight for Lepris. I mean, he's the Canadian here, so he's going to have the crowd behind him a little bit more. So the Sedeno, it's his fight really again to win or lose. I think Lepris is the better fighter, and I'm impressed. I mean, with both these Ultimate Fighter winners, Theodoro and Lepris, I think that they had a bright future ahead, and they can definitely win some fights in the UFC. So this is probably going to be another impressive performance by Lepris.
And I agree that this is Lepris' fight to lose, but Sedeno is going to be very dangerous early. Obviously, in his UFC debut against Ernest Chavez, he came out swinging and, had Chavez in trouble, but then completely ran out of steam, got out grappled, and ended up losing a decision. This time around, Lepris is a very talented lightweight. He's going to be dangerous, and Sedeno is going to have to try to get that damage in early and potentially get a finish, because I really don't see Sedeno winning a decision here. Sedeno is dangerous, he is powerful, and he packs some serious punch and has some dynamic kicks. So you have to be careful against him, but Lepris is pretty technical, he's composed, he's going to be patient in there, and as long as Lepris weathers the storm, then he'll be in pretty good shape. I don't see Sedeno being extremely dangerous after the opening frame, but again, if he could catch Lepris with something, so Lepris is going to have to be on his guard early in this fight. And the longer this goes, the more it's going to tilt in Lepris's favor. I believe Lepris has a pretty good ground game as well he can fall back on. And Sedeno, well, he has taken some time to really work on improving his wrestling. It's not at an elite level yet, and I don't think a victory over a blown-up bantamweight on short notice is going to prove the doubters wrong. So, honestly, Sedeno, while he's dynamic and dangerous, if he doesn't get anything done in the first 5 minutes, then this is going to be an easy Lepris win, whether it's a finish or a decision. Lepris is just a little bit more well-rounded in every aspect, and he should be able to control where this fight takes place. He should be able to control the action if it's on the feet or on the ground. He's just a better overall fighter. He's more accurate. He has better defense, and I feel like Lepris is probably going to come in here and look really good. So my pick is Chad Lepris. Now the co-main event of the evening is a bantamweight contest between Rafael Assunção, who is 21-4, taking on Brian Caroway, who is 19-7. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Assunção minus 350, the comeback on Caroway plus 250. Right now over at 5 dimes, it's minus 280 for Assunção. The comeback on Caroway is around plus 200 or so. So some early support coming in on Caroway. I'm not that surprised. I mean, Caroway's definitely earning some respect finally. Some respect actually he deserves. I know early on in his career, I think one of the biggest problems for Caroway was really his mental game. I think mental preparation, he didn't have that confidence that he needed to have to be successful in the big leagues. He kind of questioned himself, second guessed himself. He had some solid training partners around him, but it just didn't translate as well into the cage. And he kind of had some lackluster performances or some letdown spots along the way. But more recently, I mean, the guy's looked great. He's been on an impressive overall streak. I mean, he's got that in between it. He's got that split decision loss to Mizugaki. But, I mean, coming off his last couple fights, he was impressive against Bedford and really impressive against Perez as well. And I think he's got that mental aspect of his game down now. He's got the confidence. He knows he's good. He knows he can compete with some of the best in the division. And I think that only is going to help his mindset in moving forward. I mean, he knows that he can compete with the best. Now, Assunção is one of those guys, though. And stylistically, Caroway, on the feet, he's getting better. You can't exactly count him out, but make no mistake, he's more of a wrestler, grinder, grappling-based fighter. He looks to take the fight to the ground and utilize his outstanding submission game. Against Assunção has pretty good takedown defense. He's not one to really get bullied around too much. Even if you do push the pace on Assunção, even standing, his angles are pretty impressive. His footwork's pretty impressive. His counterattacks are pretty impressive. And on the feet, I mean, he will literally run circles around Caroway. There's no doubt. Caroway does not want to stand and bang with Assunção. Assunção has some power to go along with that skill set. He's a tremendous striker, but not just that. Assunção is a well-rounded fighter. He can take the fight to the floor in most cases when needed. He's got an outstanding submission game as well. Defensively, in his submission game, I know he was submitted by Uriah Faber back in the day a little bit, but outside of that, his defense has been pretty solid overall, and he's a hard guy to sub. But make no mistake, a guy like Caroway, that he excels at his submission game, if Caroway gets Assunção's back, I can see Caroway possibly pulling off the upset win. If Assunção makes a mistake on the ground against Caroway, Caroway's the type of fighter that really takes advantage of that stuff, and he can end the fight rather quickly. So that's Caroway's way to win this fight. And I think that's why people are supporting Caroway and betting him a little bit, because they believe he's got a shot along the way to maybe grab a guillotine choke or maybe grab, get on Assunção's back and choke him out that way. I think Assunção realizes this. He's another guy that's actually all aspects of his games are really clicking right now. Assunção's got confidence. I mean, he has a win over the current bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw. We all know that. That was a pretty impressive performance there as well. It was a close fight, but still a lot of people, it's kind of a controversial fight, but still Assunção hung in there well enough, whether you believe he won that fight or not. He definitely was close enough to make things interesting against the number one fighter right now in the weight class. Dominic Cruz, I know, has something to say about that, so I realize that. But I'm saying right now, TJ Dillashaw is the man at bantamweight. You got to respect him. He's got the title, and Assunção performed well against him. So in this matchup, it's really another spot where Assunção doesn't make a mistake. He should be able to kind of win his fight easily by decision. I think he should be able to outpoint Caroway, do enough damage. He could possibly even finish Caroway on the feet along the way. Caroway, sometimes his gas tank is an issue. He tends to slow down as the fight goes on, and if he's not having a tremendous amount of success along the way, you can tell his confidence starts to drop a little bit. He cannot afford to do that against a guy like a Sansao. A Sansao will take advantage, capitalize, and maybe even finish the fight late as it goes. So I think it's a Sansao's fight, another case where it's his fight to win or lose. He should be able to keep the fight upright. He should be able to use those angles on the feet and pick Caroway apart, and do enough damage along the way he could possibly get a finish. So I disagree with the support on the dog here. I think a Sansao does come away with a victory.
And I agree. Sansao is just the more well-rounded fighter when you compare these guys skill set for skill set. Now, Caroway is a talented guy. He has a very good ground game. His offensive wrestling is solid, and he's very opportunistic with chokes. The problem here is Sansao actually has a very good base in jiu-jitsu. That's where he started. And, he was getting a lot of hype when he first came up in the ranks as a very strong submission fighter. And he's actually been adding to his game to the point where he's a little more dangerous now on the feet. Not perhaps by knockout per se, but he is going to go in there and he's going to outwork his opponents. He's going to outpoint them. He's going to outstrike them and usually control the way the fight takes place. I mean, look at his the debut of Pedro Munoz, a really hyped prospect, and Sansao just completely controlled that fight and I believe outlanded him almost 3-1. So Santao's striking has come a very long way. He's looked really good actually, and the fact that he's the only bantamweight on the UFC roster to have a competitive fight with TJ Dillashaw thus far, and actually won a split decision against him, speaks volumes. Now, in terms of ground game, Caroway could get this to the canvas. I believe his wrestling is rock solid, and he might be able to drag this fight to the ground. But Sansao should be able to hold his own there as well. Obviously, his takedown defense is pretty good, and these guys have a comparative skill level on the ground, and Sansao might actually be a little bit better. Now, on the feet, Caroway doesn't really offer much. He has a decent 1-2 combination, but he doesn't pack a lot of power. He basically just distracts you on the feet so that he can close the distance and either get a body lock or shoot a double or do whatever it takes to get the fight to the ground. So when you look at this fight comparatively, I just don't see a lot of ways for Bryan Caroway to win convincingly. Sansao is just a better overall fighter. He's fighting for more. He wants to get a shot at the belt. He obviously already has a close win over the champion, and that TJ Dillashaw wants to avenge. And I think they're setting him up here to get a win and be one of the next title contenders. So I just don't really like Bryan Caroway's paths to victory here, although he does have some solid wins on his resume. Sansao is just the better overall fighter with higher quality wins, and he should probably win a decision here. So my pick is going to be Rafael Sansao. Now, what do the numbers tell us, Reed?
Well, I think they're generally in agreement with the story here. The difference in stand-up is pretty clear. Caroway really isn't a striking specialist. His specialty is definitely on the ground, and the numbers do reveal that. His striking accuracy is pretty low. He doesn't have any knockdowns, and his defense is pretty bad. He allows a lot of strikes to land on target. Sansao is kind of average in terms of his accuracy and power, but he does have good defense, and he maintains a higher pace, and he outworks his opponents. So on the feet, Sansao will be the busier guy, and he's just going to be landing more efficient in the exchanges. So the big question everybody wants to know is Caroway going to get Sansao down and submit him? It's interesting. Recently, someone was asking me for talking points for Ronda Rousey, assuming that she has the best submission success rate in history. And actually, when I looked it up, Bryan Caroway has one of the highest submission success rates in history, which is funny because obviously they're kind of at odds with each other. This is right during the TV show. So I did run that number. Bryan Caroway is sneaky dangerous on the mat. So I don't know if Sansao wants to play that game with him. If he does, his takedown defense is actually pretty good. So Caroway will have some trouble getting Sansao down. Caroway's takedown success rate, 44%. He definitely attempts a lot. So in terms of, for every minute standing, he is going to attempt 0.8. He attempts about twice the normal rate of takedown attempts, maybe almost 3 times. So Caroway definitely tries to get the fight down, but his accuracy is a little bit, it's just average, basically. And Assunção, his takedown defense is well above average. So, when you look at what numbers are important in terms of can a guy get the fight to the ground, the numbers don't really support that case. They say it's going to be tough for Caroway to get it down, and if he's stuck just standing and trading with Assunção, I think he's just going to get outworked. So it's a tough matchup for Caroway. He's certainly still dangerous. I think he's outperformed in the past, expectation anyway. But Assunção is just very well-rounded, very experienced. Even if he's on the mat and gets in a bad spot, he should have the experience to either survive the round or get out of it. I agree with Assunção as a solid favorite here. And I think Caroway is just going to have a tough night standing on his feet.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening. We have Rory McDonald, who is 17-2 overall, taking on Tarek Saffiedine, who is 15-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened McDonald minus 350, the comeback on Saffiedine plus 250. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, there has been a little bit of movement on this fight, and is currently Saffiedine at plus 370 and McDonald's minus 510. So a lot more action coming in out of McDonald, as a betting favorite. It was going back and forth a little bit early on, with the betting line. It kind of dropped a little bit, but of course now it continued to escalate a little bit as we get closer to fight time, and he is 5-1 again, Rory as a favorite. So starting to get a little tricky. I do believe that Rory McDonald is the better fighter out of the two for sure. I mean, he's looked tremendous out there. He's been able to basically do what he does against quality competition, which is, in his last fight against Woodley, a lot of people didn't believe, including myself. I knew he would probably beat Woodley. Obviously we bet on him, but at the same time, I didn't think he would dominate as much as he did. And Woodley's no joke at all. So, Rory McDonald continues to improve his overall skill set, but he also mentally and physically continues to improve as well. Fight IQ is a big thing, and Rory, you don't have to usually worry about fight IQ with Rory. And it is very frustrating when you're betting on a fighter and you have to worry about that. They do typically do some dumb stuff. With Rory, like I said, he continues to just improve his overall skill set and his fight IQ. So that's a good sign. He's relatively young, so he's 25 years old, and he's faced basically the who's who in the division already now. He's starting to, at least early on, in Rory's career, when he was getting all the hype, a lot of people were like, who has he fought? Well, if you look at it now, he's fought Woodley, he's fought Maia, 2 impressive wins. His, split decision loss over Robbie Lawler was very competitive, very close, could have went either way really. And then of course he beat Ellenberger not, too long before that as well. So Rory McDonald has put together some solid quality wins. But this is going to be another one here for him against Saffiedine, because Saffiedine is no joke at all. I've been a big fan of Saffiedine. I think he's been underrated for a long time. The guy, what impresses me the most about Saffiedine early on in his career, I think his deficiency was definitely the takedowns and getting put on his back control a little bit, against solid wrestlers, solid fighters that would look to do that sort of thing. And working with Team Quest and Henderson and crew, Saffiedine obviously improved that area big time. His takedown defense is very solid now, so you can't just bull him around and get him to the floor. And on the feet, he's always been a sniper. We're talking about guys that have a tremendous amount of skill on the feet. Saffiedine has a lot of power. Even though he's only got 1 knockout, that's a little bit underrated, I think. I think he's actually got more power than people believe on the feet. He's got a decent submission game now to go along with it too. So he became a really well-rounded fighter, and it's because of all the work that he put in. So, coming basically from a striking base to improve and evolve like he did, you gotta be impressed with that. He's got nasty leg kicks, on the feet, Saffiedine does. So he could do some damage in a lot of areas here. I just do favor Rory because I believe that Rory is the better fighter overall. I think that, Rory has more ways to win this fight. Saffiedine's, that takedown defense that I was talking about will probably get tested here against Rory. And Rory has that underrated wrestling actually in those takedowns that he can have some possible success. Even though Saffiedine's takedown defense is legit, I think possibly he's going to have to defend against so much with Rory, and Rory's going to have 6 inches of pure reach on the feet, that Rory's going to be able to mix things up enough that he possibly might end up, maybe taking Saffiedine's back at some point, maybe getting a quick takedown at some point. And on the floor, McDonald's going to have a significant edge as far as pure submission skill goes, no doubt about it. Saffiedine's a hard guy to sub. He's never been submitted. But if anybody's capable of doing it, a guy like McDonald wouldn't shock me at all. I don't think this fight's going to end by sub, so that's not what I'm saying. But I do believe that just skill set for skill set, McDonald, I mean, again, with that 6-inch reach advantage and the way he's fighting on the feet, his fight IQ, again, it got so much better. He's going to be able to utilize that long reach, utilize that jab, and set things up and just kind of control the tempo of the fight. So on the feet, it's going to be a firefight. It'll go back and forth a little bit, but I think that reach advantage will help McDonald outpoint Saffiedine on the feet a little bit, maybe possibly do a little bit more damage. And then on the ground, of course, I do give a significant edge to McDonald, but it is going to be a hard task to defeat a guy on the ground like Saffiedine, no doubt about it. But still, this is another case that I think is just a difficult matchup for Saffiedine. I think McDonald matches up just really well with him, and I think McDonald it's really his fight to win or lose, and I do believe in the hype with Rory. I think he's legit. I mean, the guy just keeps on improving, like I said, and I think eventually we will see Rory McDonald probably wear that welterweight gold, which is going to be nothing but impressive because the guy, like I said, he keeps on getting better and better. So I'm a McDonald fan, I'm a Saffiedine fan, but in this fight, I got to lean towards McDonald.
And I'm in agreement. McDonald definitely does have more ways to win, but looking overall at it, I do think that Saffiedine has a couple ways to win as well. The main thing for him is this fight being a 5-rounder. That should be to his advantage. He has a really good conditioning. Obviously, he's been 5 rounds twice now in his MMA career when he beat Nate Marquardt for the title in Strikeforce, and then his last fight against Hyung-Ju Lim in the main event of the UFC Fight Night event. So he clearly does have a solid conditioning edge, in my opinion. Rory has shown a tendency to slow down in fights. So Saffiedine, if Rory doesn't get a big enough lead early in the fight or doesn't finish this fight, Saffiedine could take over late. The other thing Saffiedine does really well is his leg kicks. Now, he doesn't have the thunderous leg kicks of, say, Edson Barboza or Douglas Lima or somebody else that finishes fights with leg kicks all the time, but he does throw them often. He throws them well, and when they do connect, they accumulate, and they do end up doing a lot of damage. So Saffiedine does have an ability here to land some good leg kicks against McDonald, because on the feet, I really don't see Saffiedine being able to land a lot of punches, because Rory does have, as Nick mentioned, that 6-inch reach advantage, and he uses it extremely well. I mean, you look at his last fight against Tyron Woodley, and McDonald was a master of distance. He kept that jab in Woodley's face, completely stifled him, and Woodley was a deer in the headlights. He just had no idea what to do. Now, obviously, I think Saffiedine is a much more seasoned striker, and he should be able to deal with that a little bit better, but the only way that he's going to be able to land strikes consistently is with his feet, because it's going to be difficult. Every time he comes in to try to land with his hands, he's going to get punished by Rory. Rory is that good with his distance and his reach. Now, in terms of skill for skill, obviously, Rory does have the advantage when this fight goes to the ground. He uses his offensive wrestling every once in a while pretty well. He has some nice takedowns against Robbie Lawler, which isn't that easy. He's used his wrestling in the past, has some pretty good ground and pound and offensive submission ability as well. And Saffiedine, he's more of a guy that wants to stay in the pocket, maybe a little bit further back, and try to pick you apart. And that is going to be difficult if he tries to employ that same game plan against Rory, just because of Rory's size and length. So, honestly, I think what this fight boils down to is, can Saffiedine survive early and come on late? And while I do think this fight could potentially go all 5 rounds, I don't think Saffiedine can win 3 of them. So I'm going to go with Rory McDonald. So Rory just has a little bit more ways to win and a lot more tools than Saffiedine. So my pick is Rory. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers have a pretty clear story here. And Rory McDonald, first of all, with 76.5-inch reach, that wingspan is way above average for welterweight. He's one of the longest, rangiest welterweights. He's a big, strong guy, and he knows how to use his reach. And what I mean by that is when I look at the numbers, he actually has a very calculated attack. He maintains a high pace, but he really relies on his jab. His jab lands with 40% accuracy, which is very high, but he also uses it a lot. So when you look at the power ratio, people using their jabs versus their power hand, unlike a striker, for example, like Gunnar Nelson, who doesn't use a jab at all, Rory McDonald has a really good reach, and he uses a lot of jabs, and they're very accurate. They're crisp. So he is going to be using that, I think, pretty effectively, because you got to do something. You can't just sit on the outside of Saffiedine's leg kicks. On the flip side, so Saffiedine, his striking profile is very good. He's accurate. but he does have a short reach. But he's just more skilled. He's hard to hit. He is very, very accurate. He doesn't quite keep up with his opponents. Part of that is maybe his range. He also likes to switch stance, which Rory McDonald does too, as well. But the key to Saffiedine has got to be those leg kicks. I mean, 27% of all his standing strikes are leg kicks. That's about 3 times the normal rate. You look at Donald Cerrone against Eddie Alvarez, chopped him down. That's what a guy can do when he's using a high volume of leg kicks over multiple rounds. And this is a lot of rounds here, so there's some time for that to build up. But I do think Rory McDonald is going to stay out of trouble there. He's also prepared for that attack. So he's going to be staying out of range. He's going to be in a very crisp jab. That's how he is going to win the stand-up exchanges with that reach. So on the ground, I think McDonald is just a little bit gamier. I mean, this is a guy that even several years ago, they were talking about Rory McDonald. He's the only guy in the gym that could take rounds off of GSP on the mat. And that's saying a lot. GSP is one of the best MMA wrestlers there is. McDonald is just bigger, stronger, younger. And that's all there is to it. He's very experienced. So he should be well situated across the board here. But that's not to say that Saffiedine isn't dangerous. I mean, he really is. The striking that he has, given that he's usually at a reach disadvantage, is pretty impressive. So if it goes to a striking duel, that reach differential is going to make a huge difference. At this level, this good a competition, very well-matched fighters, a simple thing like reach can have a big effect.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 54. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night around 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at Premium Oddscast on Twitter or at MMAOB_premium because that's where we'll post the plays first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just message picks at MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.